Welcome to the MOYA podcast, the official podcast of the Macedonian Orthodox Youth of Australia.
All right, good evening. Over the past few weeks, or I guess almost 6 weeks, something like that, we've been fasting for the feast of Sts Peter and Paul, which is this Sunday. And so the liturgy on Sunday is going to be served for that, and that's the fasting as well, which is great. So our topic today is going to be about Saints Peter and Paul. We'll look a little bit into the Bible readings that are going to be taking place in the liturgy as well, but we'll also talk a little bit about what these two saints sort of mean for us. So here, we've got some good points about them. Both of them were marked by, as it says, by weakness, but also the weakness was then transfigured and transformed by God. So he took unexpected people and turned them into the sort of the greatest in amongst his church. That's a story all throughout the Bible, as we know. Whenever God works with people, he almost always takes those that we least expect, and he transforms their weakness into strength. So characteristic of his weakness, the big ones that we talk about perhaps is St. Peter, his denial of Christ right before the crucifixion, and he denied him 3 times before the sort of the court of the Jews, the Sanhedrin. And Paul was a very renowned persecutor of the church. He was a well-learned Jewish rabbi, and he used to be called Saul, and then at conversion he became Paul. And so, yeah, he was known for both his sort of, let's say, scholarly knowledge, which he put to use afterwards when he was a Christian, into explaining how all this sort of deep theology about Christianity, which we read in the epistles. But yeah, he was also, because of the fact that he was really zealous for Judaism, he saw Christianity as a threat to Judaism, and so he persecuted the church and participated in the martyrdom of Saint Stephen. Is when we sort of first encounter Paul in the book of Acts. And so these two men are what we call the pillars of the church. And so we're going to explore, what does true faith look like? What does it mean to know Christ? And how does God work through weakness rather than through strength? In what ways can he work through weakness? Okay, so we've got the reading for this Sunday is actually going to be from 2 Corinthians. Yeah, that's actually, I think that goes a bit further than the reading that we have on Sunday. It goes to chapter 12, verse 9. The reading, I'm pretty sure, only goes to verse 30, but we can go all the way. So, doing something to you.
Already.
Oh, thank you.
But whatever anyone else dares to boast of, I am speaking as a fool. I also dare to boast of that. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they offsprings of Abraham? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I am a better one. I am talking like a madman, with far greater labors, far more imprisonments, with countless beatings, and often near death. 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes less one. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea, on frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers, in toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. And apart from other things, there is a daily pressure on me of my anxiety for all the churches. Who is weak, and am I not weak? If I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. So to keep me from becoming conceited, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly in my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me.
Yeah, thank you. So, go to the next one. We see in this passage all the ways in which St. Paul can boast about his accomplishments, I suppose. So, for example, he talked at the beginning, well, if anyone's going to boast about being a Hebrew, he's a Hebrew. If they're going to boast about being ministers of Christ, if they're going to boast about how much work they're doing for Christ, he can basically point to how much more that he's done, especially if we talk about the persecution that he suffered and sort of the trials that he endured. There was that bit there about from the Jews, he received 39 lashes 5 times on 5 different occasions. It's not sort of pleasant experience. It's actually like leaves you completely battered, bruised, bloody, and everything all over the back. Like it's not some sort of small thing. Like they use very heavy whips and all that kind of thing. It's yeah, it can in fact kill you just from that. But he wasn't killed by that. But then he talks about the fact that he's got all these things that he can boast about, but he'd rather boast about how Christ takes his weakness and makes that into something for his glory. So um, yeah. So what it says there, the less we rely on our own strength and the more we rely on Christ's strength and his grace, the more that we can actually accomplish. So it is not because of the fact that Paul was a Pharisee, so he talks in other places about being a Pharisee above all the rest and being more zealous than all the Jews. It's not any of those things that he did that accomplished the things that he did, but it's rather Christ working through him and his reliance on Christ and his grace by which Paul could be transfigured. And really, that's sort of, I suppose, what Paul is trying to tell his audience here, that we too need to not so much be focused on our own strength and think, what can I do to be better, like for myself. Although we should, of course, be striving to become better versions of ourselves, but we shouldn't be striving to do that, I suppose, from our own labors, but always relying on the grace of God to bring about that transformation of our weakness into strength. So, another thing to note here that's mentioned is okay, in the modern world, perhaps we can see these things and not think too much about them, but when we cast our mind back to the time of Paul, all these things about weakness is not positive, right? In sort of these older societies, in fact, it could almost be seen as a negative, like, oh well, clearly since you've got all these weaknesses, you've got this thorn in the flesh, whatever. Either your God doesn't care about you, or your message is false, etc. Right? So this is in fact also, um, let's say, a bit of a radical message to the ancient world, where we're talking about a God that is quite different to the character of many other gods. So many other gods would want, for example, champions. Like they pick out like a champion. Well, this is at least the mythology, right? But we don't believe in the other gods. But the mythology is that they have like a champion, someone who's strong, who could impose their will on others. But that is not the character of the true God. The character of the true God is one who can take um, what is there and use what is there in any case. And it doesn't matter if that person is perceived as not being useful to others. So another part here is that we see that Paul suffers a lot for his faith. And we know that faith is not just an intellectual thing. It's not just saying, I believe, but rather it's a life lived. Specifically, there's another way you can translate the Greek word faith to mean faithfulness, which talks about, I suppose, a relationship between the believer and between God. So when we talk of faith, we can also think of the concept of faithfulness. And faithfulness is a sort of relational term. For those who have been in a relationship, in fact, everyone's been in a relationship with their parents. But at least if you've been in a relationship with another person, let's say dating or married or whatever, you know that in such a relationship, you're never going to have all these happy times. So it's through sort of the trials in a relationship that we often strengthen that relationship, and that we come to appreciate the relationship more, and that we grow in that relationship. Now, God obviously is not the one who needs to grow in the relationship between us and Him, but rather when we undergo these trials, that is when we can sort of attain a true faith, right? The true faithfulness. Once we've gone through the hardships. So perhaps your hardship's not going to be being beaten 39 times with a whip, but obviously there's this idea that people talk about is like the long night of the soul or something like that, which is basically like there'll be times where you go through periods where you're sort of unsure about your faith, you're sort of maybe you're angry at God for something, didn't give you whatever, maybe someone in the church has offended you, etc. There's all these kinds of things where our faith can be tested in one day, and sometimes we have to think. In some cases, some of these things might be sent to help strengthen our faith. So we need to fight through that and remain faithful. So I suppose there's a question here: is an area of your life you've experienced a weakness, failure, or suffering, and perhaps you can see God was working through it in a way you can't see at the time. And that could be in any element of your life, I suppose. I'll go on to that in a second. But one thing to consider, I suppose, even in the case of St. Paul, is that oftentimes when we go through these struggles in the faith or with our faithfulness, whatever, we shouldn't be going through them alone. Now, Paul didn't go through these alone either. He often had his disciples with him, also his sort of friends with him, his fellow preachers. And we read, for example, Paul and Barnabas went on a missionary trip together. He had people with him when he was in Rome, etc. So a lot of the time, when people have a struggle with the faith, or with faith in general, any event, a lot of the time people can sometimes want to just go through it by themselves, which is not necessarily something that is all that advised in most cases. I suppose sometimes there are things that you should go do just between you and Christ. But a lot of the time you want to be laboring together. So I'll let you figure out how that might look for yourself. We'll go to the gospel reading, which is the gospel reading for Sunday, which is now about Peter. So the service on Saturday night, which the Sunday night service is also sort of part of the Feast of St. Peter and Paul. Half of it is basically about Peter, half of it's about Paul, and then there's like mixes of both of them all at once. So the gospel reading is focused on Peter, the epistles of Paul. So the gospel reading, why don't you read it?
Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, Who Who do people say that the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets. He said to them, but who do you say that I am? Simon Peter replied, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven, by my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be lost in heaven.
So one of the key things here is this confession of Peter that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, Christ being the anointed one, the Messiah. And so this confession, in fact, for those who do their pre-communion prayers may find it familiar, or in fact, when the priest comes out, this is what he'll read. He reads in part of it, I believe, and I confess that truly the Christ, the Son of the living God, who came into the world to save sinners of human and sheep, which is actually the second part of that phrase taken from St. Paul's epistle. But yeah, all of us, in fact, before we partake of communion, at least if you understand the language, what the priest is saying, will have heard this confession. And this confession that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, and that he's the Son of the living God and is God, is the confession on which the church is built. Now, when we think of a confession, when we think of confession, we probably think about confessing to the priest. But if we, in this context, the confession is not necessarily that. It's sort of a saying who God is. A lot of times when we think about works that are saying who God is, they're very long academic books, a bit boring to read. But in this case, the real confession, the one that really matters, is this one that Christ is the Son of the living God. That Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And it's one that's born out of faith, and it sort of tells us, now, what I'm about to say is not to say that all academic theology is of no use and it's not important, but the sort of the confession that allows us to be in the church and that allows us to have a relationship with God is a simple one. And as long as we are in that sort of church that Christ founded and we confess this thing, then we are members of Christ's body. And so sometimes, for some people, they get too caught up in the theoretical academic theology and don't live the simple Christian life of faithfulness to God. But then also some people don't do either of those things. So we should be focused on the relationship with the Messiah and the Son of God. Is what I'm trying to say. So it's that's an act of living faith, and that living faith is one that we should be emulating of Peter's. Now, this is a revelation given by the Father to Peter. So by God the Father to Peter. It's not something that he came up with. It's something that because Peter had basically been following Christ in his earthly ministry and was coming to know him more, is something that he was now prepared to receive this revelation from God. It's not something you could scientifically determine, but is something that God allows us to learn about him and allows us to act from that. So it's a grace. It allows us to enter into further grace, I suppose. So there's this question here. If Christ asked you personally, "Who do you say I am?" What would you say? And that's maybe not necessarily a question of dogmatic theology, but what is your experience of Christ? And do you have the experience of Christ, I suppose? So I suppose I should clarify one thing that I was just saying, which is in terms of like that academic theology, what we learn from history and what we learn from the people who knew all this academic theology, let's say, is that all of that could only be revealed to someone who was humble of heart and willing to receive Christ in this simple relationship. So you can only really. It's like if I academically told you about my wife and told you, oh, she's got like brown hair and like a white skin or something. Like, okay, that's all well and good, but you won't understand any of that unless you're in the relationship that I'm in, right? And it's like that with Christ. So unless you're in that relationship with Christ, and simple, faithful relationship full of grace, you won't understand anything else. Like you can pick at all these things, but it's not going to be anything really for you unless you've got that basic thing first. Let's say. So if you continue on, so there's this idea here as well. The idea of Peter's confession and the fact that the gates of hell will not stand against the church. Now, we know that, so Christ says, upon the rock he'll build his church. But it's we also know, for example, that Peter, only a couple of days later, would go on to deny Christ and say, I don't even know who he is. Now, there's a few sort of things surrounding this discussion, but to keep it simple, at the very least, what we know is that the rock is something, is a confession of Peter. And his confession is one that we can all make. It's one that the church as a whole makes. So, and basically where Christ is, because it's sort of a relational confession, really. Because when we confess that we're in relation to Christ, well, Christ is the gates of hell cannot stand, which is why the church continues on. Now, does this mean that you'll never hear you'll never have someone in church who isn't actually a Christian, or even a priest might go and do his own thing? Historically, you had bishops and priests going off and doing their own thing and having what we call heresies and schisms and all that kind of thing. That all still happens, but we know that the church is going to exist despite these things. Now, basically, when we abandon that relationship with Christ and is no longer there, that is when you sort of have the demonic realm, or Hades or hell, can prevail against the person or the group of people, etc. So, yeah, it says here, I suppose, what does it say here? No, it doesn't say here. In a sense, this is not a promise to a institution as such. So let's say the Macedonian Orthodox Church. It's not a promise to the Macedonian Orthodox Church, but to all believers, all Orthodox Christians. So it means that those within that group of people, sometimes they'll do wrong by you, and sometimes what we might think of as the church, so let's say someone who's got a lot of influence in the church might be wrong by you, and they might not act in a Christ-like manner. But in spite of all those things, even like a bishop might go astray and do his own thing. In spite of all those things, we know that Christ's promise still holds true, and the church is still there. Even so, this is sort of an encouragement to us, I suppose, that even through a lot of the trials a lot of the trials of faith that can even arise from the church, we know that, not from the church, but from what we consider as those within the church. Even though a lot of the trials of faith can come from that, we know that Christ is still there, ready to be in relationship with us, and that his church truly will not be prevailed against by his enemies. So you've got here this question: what keeps you coming back to church? Habit, faith, community, or something else? I think this was changed, wasn't it?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so this is why I'm confused. But that's all right. That's a fine question as well. What keeps you coming back to church? Habit, faith, community, or something else? And maybe what do you understand to be church as well? Is also a good question.
What keeps me coming back to church? I feel like, waking up every Sunday and knowing that if I go to church, I'll be receiving the Holy Communion. I feel like that's something that really drives me to go to church. And I feel like on Sundays that I miss out on going to church, I don't feel completed.
Yeah.
But whereas if I do receive it, I feel like my week is completed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good reason to come to church.
Yeah. I think there are two primary things that make me think about church a lot.
Yeah.
Firstly, obviously, obligation, and that can be interpreted both because of the authority of the church and because of the Holy Communion. Holy Eucharist. The Eucharist is the sacrament of sacraments. It's the body and blood of Christ. And to say that, even attending church weekly is like not an obligation, like to go every Sunday is not an obligation, I think is like profoundly neglected, and it's very instituted within like modern society that to say missing mass is like an okay thing, it's like not, because when the church tells you that you have this obligation to attend mass every Sunday, it's like that's the bare minimum to, like, it's like if somebody was to tell you, if like you are obligated to eat food once a week, you will survive but you will not flourish, you will not remain healthy. So I think that there's an obligatory need for all of the faithful to attend mass every week and to go to church at least once a week.
Yeah. I suppose we could use the analogy I was talking about before. In a sense, I have an obligation to speak to my wife every day. If I don't speak to my wife every day, then the relationship deteriorates. So even like we know about prayer, we know about all those kinds of things, but maybe prayer, I could pray every day and that's good. And then I also have an obligation to do something special with my wife as well, like a date night. So if I want my relationship to grow, I need to actually spend quality time with my wife, and that's the same thing with God. It's more important with God as well, because obviously the relationship with God is more important than the relationship with the wife. So we should think of it in those relational terms, I think. And that's part of why sometimes maybe you wake up on a Sunday and you say, oh, I can't be bothered. But we do that in our earthly life. A lot of things when we can't be bothered as well. Like we go to work when we can't be bothered. Sometimes we go to like a hangout with friends when we can't be bothered because we're prioritizing. In the case of work, I want to earn money. In the case of the friends, I want to stay with that friendship group, etc. And I'm going to sacrifice something from me to allow that relationship to prosper. So I suppose that's an addition to what you were saying. But yes, there's an obligation to give, coming back to the liturgy. Did anyone else want to share anything? Yeah.
I don't want to share something fun.
Yeah.
Can we ask a question after, or was it?
Yeah, I think this question is very shortly. Yeah.
I think it might be like a bit of all three of those things. I think at the start you need to, I guess, it helps to build a connection at least with someone. Something
Yeah.
maybe like, I guess in our case, some youth similar to you. And then again, once you start going a little bit, maybe with a friend or something, I guess the habit builds up.
Yeah.
Maybe you start fasting. And as you go, then your faith grows, your knowledge grows, and then all three of these things coming together. And yeah, you're there for all three things: the community, your faith, becomes a habit, and salvation. I guess.
Yeah, I think
altogether.
all of those things are important.
Yeah.
think it's the questions. Yeah. Final thoughts. Before final thoughts, let's add some extra thought. Just from the service, the evening service, I might read a couple of things, just so we can understand just why these two scenes are so important. So, these come from this comes from Vespers. You've granted confirmation unto your church, O Lord, the steadfastness of Peter, the understanding and splendid wisdom of Paul, and the truly divine proclamation of them both, which dispels the deception of the Greeks. Wherefore, having been initiated into the mysteries by both of them, with him, you, O Almighty Jesus, the Saviour of our souls. And again, you provided the sinful with a model of repentance, your two apostles. For the one denied you at the time of your suffering, yet repented, while the other, opposing the preaching of you, later came to believe. And both are preeminent among the assembly of their peers of Almighty Jesus, the Saviour of our souls. So, I think, we have to remember, as it says here, they were both quite changed by the encounter with Christ. It allowed them to confess that he was the Christ and Son of the living God. It wasn't something that was necessarily a debate, but rather something that came about through a relationship and through grace. And so part of our response to this should be that we're wanting to emulate these apostles. We often deny Christ in our lives, for example. We deny him through our actions. When we sin, we deny him because we deny that relationship. It's like if I yell at my wife and like storm off and go and give her the silent treatment or something. Or the other way maybe. But we often do that through our actions. We also sometimes do it through our words. So, for example, we can sometimes be flippant about Christian things. We might take the name of God in vain, might casually blaspheme, and all these kinds of things. We can sometimes do it by our inaction. So keeping, for example, if we keep company with people who are regularly blaspheming Christ and saying all sorts of things, I'm not saying you have to go and be a crusader, but for example, that you might just need to stop having a relationship with those kinds of people if they're not going to repent. Like, you can talk to them about it, and if nothing changes, then maybe it's something you just move on. So there's all the kinds of ways we can deny Christ, but we just need to remember that we need to repent and become like these two men who are willing to go through all these sufferings and trials for their faith. And in fact, Peter went through a lot as well. We didn't really touch on that, but he also was quite persecuted for his Christian faith. So I think it's like 7:50.
Yeah.
Let's just skip this question, and if you have any questions, you can ask me now.
I think Paul says in Corinthians that flee from all sorts of sexual morality.
Yeah.
If you know that verse.
Yeah.
And they say that the marriage was invented as a way that it might stop sexual immorality. In today's day and age, obviously, there's so much perversion or all this corruption, whatever. Yeah. How can we, as Orthodox Christians, maintain a pious life in this day and age that is not, that can help us become better? Like, is it?
There's a lot of parts to your question, I suppose. I'll just go through the order you asked them. Yes, Paul does say to flee. He gives what we call vice lists and virtue lists. So he lists all these sort of vices, the sort of things that get in our way with the relationship with God. One of those is sexual immorality, as you said. He said marriage was invented as a way to stop that. I don't know if that's necessarily 100% the case. It's part of its purpose, I suppose, is to use those kind of things for the purpose of God. But I mean, even Eve was created for Adam before any kind of sin existed. So sometimes some people can take a negative view of marriage and see it as something lesser than like monasticism, for example. Now, monasticism is a good way to grow your relationship with Christ. It's very important, and it's very important we have monastics. But we shouldn't take, for example, monasticism as the only sort of way to live a true Christian life. Marriage is a very important way for most Christians that they'll be living a Christian life as well. So, and then there's a case where maybe you don't choose either of those. And in whatever circumstance, Christ calls you to be a martyr. So in the marriage service, in the crowning, that's actually representative of the crowns of martyrdom. You're martyring yourself to the world. And so there's a very real sense in which a marriage is it's both a blessing, but there's also obviously a struggle as well involved. And you struggle together and not against your wife or husband, your spouse. And you struggle together to become as Christ-like as you possibly can. And that's the real purpose of marriage, I suppose. So that's the most important purpose of marriage. St. John Chrysostom says that your marriage can be as blessed as the monks if you're doing this sort of thing where you're devoting yourselves together to Christ. Now, I think you asked, how can we live faithfully as Orthodox Christians in a world with all sorts of immorality? I think we shouldn't think of the modern age as uniquely immoral. There's a sense where there's an acceleration of some forms of immorality, but obviously this immorality existed in the ancient world as well. Even in Paul's time, even in like, let's say, when all of or 95% of Europe was Christian, there was still immorality all throughout society, and that's just because, as Christ says, the path is narrow of salvation and wide to hell. So I suppose we're given the examples of saints who lived through a lot of different kinds of trials. Some saints lived through trials where they were physically persecuted, and you can understand how to live through physical persecution from the examples. There's some saints who lived through temptations of other kinds, I suppose, if you're talking about sexual immorality. Blessed Augustine, Saint Augustine.
Was a womanizer.
Sorry?
Wasn't he a womanizer?
Yeah, he was very sexually immoral before his conversion, and he talks about, I suppose, his struggles. So you could read from examples such as that. And there's examples of saints who've struggled with all these kinds of things. But also you can, I suppose, talk with people who have worked on conquering certain passions. So everyone is disposed towards certain sins more than others. So some people struggle a lot with anger. Some people don't really struggle with anger at all. Some people struggle with lying a lot. Some people struggle with sexual immorality. But there's examples in our very real examples, very concrete examples of this in people who have conquered these passions in the church today. And I suppose sometimes you might just have to seek that out to find someone who has worked through that. But a lot of the, God willing, your priest would be able to help you out with how to work with conquering that passion. I suppose you have to be very intentional on wanting to root out whatever the passion you're struggling with is. So let's say if one of your passions is I'm talking about passion in the sense of a sin that sort of has a hold over you, is swearing a lot, which is sinful. We should not defile ourselves by allowing what comes out of our mouth to defile us, as Christ says. Then you have to just intentionally not sin, not swear. So, I mean, I'll say, for example, I used to swear a lot, and then I would confess it to my confessor, and I was intentional on trying to swear less and not justify my sins. So a lot of the time we also justify our sins. We also don't want to give occasion to sin. So suppose if certain things happen in the lead up to you doing any sort of sin. So let's take anger for an example. If you start sort of if you get angry with one person a lot in a relationship, you can probably notice what sort of things set you off. And then you want to nip it in the bud at that point rather than trying to do it right when like all the rage has boiled to the surface and you have an outburst. And then you sort of slowly work on cutting all these things down. Now, when the sin is very ingrained, it's like a big tree with very deep roots and it's very hard to get rid of. And you have to just get rid of it slowly and it will keep regrowing. Anyone who's done any gardening work knows that like sort of weed infestation is horrific to deal with if it's all over the place. But if it's a small thing, and this is the best thing to do, if it's a small sin and it's not got a hold of you, and it's very easy for you to not do it, then you just need to pluck it out right there and then when it's like a small weed. This is talked about in the ascetic fathers. That is especially important because a lot of the time with small sins, so-called small sins, we often overlook them and allow them to grow into big sins, and then they've got a hold over us. So I suppose, I don't know if I've answered your question. You might be thinking of something more specific, but I can always talk about these as well.